Welcome everyone, it's Frank from Talking God's Grace. Kalimera as we say in Greek, Dzień dobry as we say in Polish. Today's topic is going to be that on Raymond Franz. And I was thinking about books that you could read that if you're one of Jehovah's Witnesses, if you're a former Jehovah's Witness, if you're a person who is interested in religious freedom, and the inner outer workings of the organization of Jehovah's Witnesses, then this is a book you must read. I was thinking of the title of this part today. Here's a couple of thoughts. Ray Franz in the Quest for Spiritual Integrity, a journey of conscience, courage, and conviction. The legacy of Ray Franz, a critical analysis of Jehovah's Witness organization. The other one is Beyond the Governing Body, Ray Franz's legacy of critical thinking and individual freedom. All those fit Ray Franz and his legacy. I have read both the books when I left the organization. Oh, no, sorry. No. While I was in the organization, actually, I read the books. And in fact, others have read the books, which I was quite surprised. Even elders have read these books. So therefore, I would imagine even the governing body at the time, and probably even the present governing body, have read Ray Franz's books. So why shouldn't you read his books? There's a lot to learn from Ray Franz's book. When I first became a witness, or was studying the witness with the witnesses in the 80s, late 80s, they called that period that I was coming in a time of sifting. Why were they calling that period of time of sifting? Well, I think it was because there was, one, the failure of 1975, and then there was rumors, going around at that time. Who's to blame, pointing fingers at everybody else but the governing body and the leadership themselves. Because a lot of people lost a lot in that period. And so there was a sifting going on. This is the language or the terminology was used when I was there, the sifting. And one of the names or the rumors that came circulating around was that of Raymond Franz. I had no idea who he was. I just knew he was up the top. And the message back then was, if it happened to Ray, it can happen to you. If you believe, if you read outside sources that aren't the Watchtower itself, authorized by the Watchtower, then you could also fall prey to the snares of apostates. Yes. So today I want to talk about Ray Franz, because I think his books are really important to read. Here's a quote from Crisis of Conscience. He wrote 2 books. We'll talk a little bit about him as well, just in case some of the current generation of witnesses don't know who this man is. So let me give a little bit of background and read a little bit about him, some of the lessons I learned from him, from his books, and what you can, as I said, I encourage you to read his books if you get a chance, and I'll name the 2 books. But here's a quote from one, Crisis of Conscience, his first book. He says, "The organization, that is of Jehovah's Witnesses, has become more important than the individual, more important than the principles and teachings it was supposed to represent." From a former governing body member. So who was Ray Franz? Let me just read. Ray Franz was a former member and was an influential member of the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses who served from 1971 to 1980. He was known for his scholarship, his writing. You might think of the Aid book. He had a part in that, and plus other articles. And advocacy of human rights within the organization. So he was very conscious of trying to help the brothers and sisters and align the organization to more of a Christian, or more of a view that had Christ's view on matters. He is important to Jehovah's Witnesses because he became a prominent figure, as we know, in the community due to his position as one of the governing body. And later, also, he was trying to become an advocate for reform within the organization. So he had 2 books. He wrote 2 books. One was titled Crisis of Conscience, and the other is In Search of Christian Freedom. They're considered must-read books. Within the organization, I would recommend that you read his books, and externally, if you're a former witness. Crisis of Conscience was published in 1983, and this details Ray's experiences within the organization and his eventual departure from the governing body. Initially, he faded away. So this is a memoir that recounts his experiences and conflicts during his time as a member of the governing body. He discusses the internal struggles he faced when he began to question some of the organization's teachings and policies, eventually leading him to be disfellowshipped from the organization in 1980. It was a bestseller book and had a significant impact on the witnesses in and out, many of whom had never heard before such frank criticism of the organization's leadership. It is an eye-opener as to the going-ons in the organization and how people are appointed, etc., etc. You'd be quite surprised, and I ask you, if you can get a hold on it, it might be free online, to have a look at it if you're looking for inside information on how things work. In the book In Search of Christian Freedom, which was published in 1991, it's a follow-up of Crisis of Conscience and further explores his views on Jehovah's Witness organization and the doctrines. He does talk about such issues as freedom of conscience, individual responsibility, and the role of the Bible in your Christian life. It's a really good book for a believer to have a look at and read and get some good ideas of what he thinks about Christian living. They have had a significant impact on a lot of ex-witnesses or former witnesses, and it's helped them also, I believe, in their recovery, and also inspired them to start their own channels and get their own thoughts together to present to the public. He provides candid and critical assessment of the organization leadership and policies. He gives voice to those who had negative experiences within the organization and has encouraged discussion and debate among current and former members. Now, talk about being under pressure. I mean, he's a PMO initially, right? Physically in, mentally out, eventually. But he was a governing body member and having these experiences. Not only that, he had an uncle within the governing body. But not only within the governing body, but the president of the organization of Jehovah's Witnesses, that is Fred Franz, in the organization. Can you imagine the pressure Raymond Franz was under? Now, how did Fred Franz feel about his nephew's departure and leaving the organization, because he obviously of the turmoil that was happening within, and who later became a vocal critic of the policies and the procedures of Jehovah's Witnesses? How would he have felt? Well, there's nothing really written about how he felt. Obviously Ray Franz, his departure was very controversial, and it was a very divisive event in that time period. Maybe he had mixed feelings about him. Who knows how Ray Franz departure affected Fred Franz's view of him and their relationship. But what do we do know that happens to members who are disfellowshipped? Because Jehovah's Witnesses have a strong policy or strict policy of shunning those who leave or are disfellowshipped. Sorry, primarily those who are disfellowshipped. Those who leave don't get shunned, although they may not be contacted often, but you can still talk to them. But those who actually are disfellowshipped are shunned, which means they're cut off from all contact from their families and former friends who remain in, and it's not a good situation. So whether or not this policy, which Fred Franz, had a part of, this is a strange thing. It's come back to bite him. He had a part of this policy in 1952, because prior to 1952 there was no disfellowshipping and no shunning. But under then he was the vice president, and I think the president was Nathan Knorr, right? So his own policy, and under his direction, because he was like the prophet of the organization, under that duo, they came up with this policy, which eventually affected his own family member or a family member. So we're not sure how he felt about all of this. So what can we learn, or what did I learn from Ray Franz's legacy as a member of Jehovah's Witnesses, governing body member, and a transition from as a former member into society? Let me read you some of the things I put down here. 1, the impact of strict religious doctrine. When we look at his experience within the organization, and he sheds light on the negative effects of strict religious doctrine and the pressure to conform to a particular set of beliefs. In the books, it really highlights the need for individuals to be free to explore their own spiritual beliefs and practices. 2, the challenges of leaving a religious community. Ray's transition out of Jehovah's Witness organization sheds light on the challenges that individuals can face when leaving this sort of environment. The importance of critical thinking, which I'll get back to that in a second. The importance of critical thinking also was a challenge is important for anyone in the organization. Having the ability to ask difficult questions and re-examine one's own beliefs, even when it means challenging the established doctrine of Jehovah's Witnesses. The value of Christian conscience or the freedom of a conscience, of one's conscience, and this book highlights these points clearly. Ray Franz believed that each individual has the right to follow their own conscience, even if it means disagreeing with the teachings of a religious organization. He emphasized the importance of individual responsibility and the need to respect the freedom of others that make these choices their own choices. Okay, now going back to that original point about the challenges of leaving an organization like that. Well, he left, but he was eventually disfellowshipped and then shunned. He faced ostracism, and once he was booted out, he had some significant challenges because he was later in his life. He wasn't a young guy. It can serve as a reminder for those who are outside to have empathy and support for those going through a similar experience. So just think on those lines. If you're a former member and you hear of other members who are being who are now shunned by the organization, know how you felt. Show the same empathy and consideration to these ones. The challenges of leaving a religious community highlights from Ray Franz's experience, highlights that there is a loss of social support networks, especially, like, for example, in his case, he was born in and had all his life, basically, until he was very late in his age, like in his 60s, and then, his support network was gone. I mean, he had a place in Bethel, etc. Can you imagine? Can you imagine the life he had led, and now he had to start all over again at that age with his wife? So there's a need to rebuild one's life once you're outside. And there's a lot of loving people outside who will support you. I can attest to that. Some of my best friends, current friends or acquaintances that I work with, I call them friends, always supporting me, are Catholics. You know, not Jehovah's Witnesses, Catholics. Of course, I have my family as well. My brothers are there to support me. But I'm just saying, there is life outside the organization. One thing you've got to come to grips with, and this is what happened to me. Now, I'm going outside of Ray Franz's books, but just on a personal note, I got to a point where I had to look at the worst case scenario. And I thought to myself, this is the worst case scenario. Can I live with this scenario? And, when I accepted that I could, then I went through it. I have a long-term vision. And my vision is a little bit longer than my current. And I thought about all the things, about my religious freedom, my possibly grandchildren. I have 2 children who are Jehovah's Witnesses, and they're both married. Now I've got possible grandchildren. And I want to leave something behind for them, so that in the future, if they decide to look at my videos and they're still up and running on the internet, they can then have a sense of understanding of what's going on and why I left and why I did what I did. In saying that, if you can't go beyond that stage, it could be because you're married. It could be because of your work and your social networks. It could be that you emotionally can't do that. Like, it's just too much for you. Then don't do it. Right? Don't expose yourself. Don't rock the boat. And there's no harm in just playing it low. I was just trying to think of the words. Just keeping a low profile. PMO, be a PMO, physically in, mentally out. It's really a very powerful position is a PMO, and I may do a video on that, on PMOs. It's a very powerful position you're in. I know there's some drawbacks to it, absolutely, but it's a very powerful position. Listen, guys, if you're married, stick with your wife, or if you're a woman, stick with your husband. Don't let the organization and its problems, cause your relationship to suffer. And your relationship with God and Christ is not going to suffer. No one's going to be disowned. I've heard others saying, well, get out, otherwise you're going to get disowned by Jesus. No, you are totally secure in Christ. Christ is in you if you're a child of God, okay? Now, you can look at other parts of my videos and you'll see that you are totally saved and secure once you believe in Jesus Christ. You can't lose your salvation, whether you can be in the organization, out the organization, you can be in another organization, you could even be in Islam. If you're a child of God, you are secured if you believe in Jesus, because you are saved. I know it's hard for people to accept and understand that. But it's mentioned 87 times that Christ is in a believer, every believer, and he's not going anywhere. So that's my personal opinion on this. A discussion for another time, for sure. We can get into that. But let's get back to Ray Franz. Another lesson there is the need for, in his book, that is, the need for transparency and accountability. His book sheds light on the inner workings of Jehovah's Witness organization and raised important questions about its leadership and policies, and it's worthwhile looking at, I'm telling you. His story underscores the need for transparency and accountability in religious organizations and institutions, particularly when it comes to issues of governance and decision-making. We can see this now with the Australian Royal Commission into Child Abuse, how Jehovah's Witnesses failed miserably in their policies and decision-makings when it came to this. Reporting a crime was too difficult for them. Not anymore. I think they've learnt They've got their discipline and their medicine, although you got to think this way, guys. They're a legal organization, and they're doing things legally. So while they understand the law, wherever the law is, whatever the law is of the country, state, community, whatever it is, they will try and fit in with that law, but at the same time, see what they don't have to do, but at the same time be protected, right? Does that make sense? It is a legalistic world we live in. Yahweh's, Satan's world is very legalistic. He's a legalist, right? I know we don't see him that way, but he is. Satan is a legalist. So you have to think that way. Organizations today are very heavy with their own departments, their own legal departments and accounting departments. Well, Jehovah's Witnesses are the same. They're heavyweights when it comes to legal representation. They get the heavyweights in because they know it's all legal. And so what they do is with these legalities, they then try to implement it, which doesn't work in the Christian congregation, but they have to for corporate governance. So we see there's a lot to learn from Ray Franz's legacy in these books. Here are some additional quotes just to finish off. In the book Crisis of Conscience, it says, in a real sense, each individual has responsibility not only to the truth, but to act on it. The right of an individual to exercise freedom of conscience has to be respected if a true moral or ethical community is to exist. In his book In Search of Christian Freedom, he says, what is true is true regardless of who says it or where it is said. It needs no organization or authority to authenticate it. That's from In Search of Christian Freedom. Another one from In Search of Christian Freedom. The essence of truly free society is not what is done for people, but what is done by people themselves. Here's another one from In Search of Christian Freedom. Truth is never afraid of being examined and tested. It is error that is fearful and insecure. And the last one, true freedom means having the ability to make our own choices, to use our own judgment, and to follow our own conscience. Well said, Mr. Brother Ray Franz. His books are important to Jehovah's Witnesses, and they've become, I think, because they provide a unique insider's perspective on the organization and its leadership. He's very candid, and his criticism of the governing body and organization practices has helped many Jehovah's Witnesses to think critically about their beliefs and to think about how this authority and leadership, this top-down structure, is it really from God? Is that what Jesus meant when he said, you are all brothers and he is the head? None of you should be leaders, as it were, right? It really does make you think deeply about if what you see today is really from Christ. His books are still read, I believe, and discussed amongst former members, and I would say even the organization today. So what is his legacy? I think he provides a powerful example of the importance of critical thinking, individual responsibility, and personal freedom, and the need for transparency and accountability in religious organizations. His story can inspire others to question and examine their own beliefs and to work towards creating more open and inclusive communities. I think Ray Franz's books is a must if you have not read them yet. I think maybe go online and have a look, see if you can find some free versions. I have read both, and they might be in libraries, I'm not sure, but I can't remember now where I read them. But they were online. That was years ago. Now, I don't know, with the internet in the last 5 years, many things have changed. So, but guys, that is my review of Ray Franz's 2 books and a little bit of personal insight into my past as well. Have a great day, guys, and talk to you soon again. See you later.